Good evening. I'm Erin Monroe, the Robert H. Schutz Associate Curator of American Paintings and Sculpture, and I'm delighted to have you join with me on this sneak preview of Paul Manship, Ancient Made Modern. We're standing at the precipice of the exhibition that begins with a look at Paul Manship's evolution as an artist through his direct contact with art of the past. Hailing from St. Paul, Minnesota, Manship's early formative years were spent at the American Academy of Rome from 1909 to 1912. In that direct contact with art of the past, from ancient sculpture to Renaissance masterpieces, Manship honed his distinctive style, working primarily in bronze. In the exhibition, you'll see tabletop statuettes, such as this piece here, and large-scale architectural designs. He had an ability to work through all kinds of ideas in the small scale and the heroic scale. I'm standing here next to one of his earliest, most accomplished bronzes called Lyric Muse from 1912. Here in this little statuette, we have the hallmarks of Manship's style. The figure's almond-shaped eyes and hair carved in a low relief style were just elements of some of the artwork from the past that he adapted and mashed up into his sculptures from the early 20th century. The figure's polished bronze surface is in fact one of the hallmarks of his distinctive style. Here we are in the first section of the exhibition called Breaking Through in Bronze. We go on a journey with Manship to his travels abroad to places like Italy, other parts of the Mediterranean, and Egypt. His close contact and close study of these ancient forms and styles immediately spurred his ideas for designs in his own work. Upon his return from studying at the American Academy in Rome in 1912, he had a breakout exhibition in New York City. It received rave reviews, and this young sculptor, honing his talent in bronze, was officially on the map. I'm standing next to Centaur and Dryad from 1913, which was included in this landmark exhibition. It announced Manship's boldly innovative style. Not only is it an elaborate sculpture with two bands of decoration and figures and motifs, but it's also quite provocative. This being one aspect that distinguished Manship's work from that of his earlier contemporaries, who excelled in sort of a static realism. Here we have a bold sculptor working in the 20th century, creating work for a modern audience. The centaur aggressively clutches a wood nymph. The theme of the sculpture relates to the god of Dionysus, followers of this god of wine who are somewhat debaucherous and revelrous. And this theme is carried out through the base, as you see here, with additional scenes of revelry and satyrs luring intoxicated wood nymphs. What makes this work exceptional is the way in which Manship takes motifs from earlier works, including some displayed nearby, and literally applies them in the surface detail. And what I mean by that is all around the base of this sculpture are beautiful bands of patterning, which he literally lifted idea-wise from things like Greek vases. And Manship was struck by these Greek vases and everyday objects, for example, which he saw on a trip to Greece, which were used to hold water or carry olive oil. And he responded to the beauty and the sense of design in something that was just everyday. He applied this sense of pattern and ornament to works such as this, demonstrating his mastery of bronze. With the title of the exhibition, Ancient Made Modern, we'll see examples of ancient art in conversation with Paul Manship's sculptures. We've just finished looking at his Centaur and Dryad, where I pointed out some of the mixing of ornamentation and other motifs that he adapted from other works. I'm standing next to a 6th century BCE Cypriot statue. This is a plaster cast after the original, and it is the type of thing that would have been on display in major museums and available to artist academies to study from firsthand. What Manship may have noticed in other works like this that he saw in his travels and visiting major museums was this free mixing of styles. In fact, this work has both Egyptianizing elements and Greek elements applied to a Cypriot work from the Mediterranean island of Cyprus. So that blending of styles is going on for thousands of years, and it's interesting to see these works in conversation with Manship's bronzes. Some of the elements that Manship may have appreciated and taken inspiration from include the almond-shaped eyes and the facial hair on this statue. This free blending of styles is something that I'll point out in other sections of the exhibition. Here we are in the next section of the exhibition called Modernizing Mythology, essentially a summation of what made Manship's works feel of the moment, but also closely connected to the past. Upon his return from the American Academy in Rome, he settled in New York City, a place brimming with innovation and technological improvements. Among the buildings being erected in Lower Manhattan was the headquarters to AT&T. The architect commissioned leading sculptors of the day to complete many of the sculptural decorations on the exterior and the interior. Behind me are these incredible panels that were originally installed above the main entrances to the AT&T building in 1921. Manship turned to the ancient Tower of the Winds in Athens for his inspiration. The horizontal frieze format, of course, came from many buildings of the ancient past, but this Tower of the Winds was very much ahead of its day. It had a sundial, it had meteorological capabilities to predict the weather, and was forward-thinking for its era in a way that the AT&T building was intended to be for the 20th century. The incredible decorative elements here stand out with Manship's application of gilding, and you begin to see his real ascendance into a sculptor who's capable of working on a large scale and highly coveted for those large-scale works. There is also, as we alluded to in the earlier section, a sensuousness with the way these bodies are depicted. By using ancient allegorical imagery that is partially clothed, these sensuous bodies were exceedingly modern at the same time. Each wearing an ornate gold headdress brings to mind the accoutrements of Indian gods and goddesses. Blending that with an ancient sensibility and the architecture of an ancient tower shows you how Manship freely sampled and brought together art of different cultures with a nod to a global sense of design. And it is that broadening of different stylistic elements that Manship brings to his work moving forward in time into the 1920s and 1930s. I'm standing next to one of the 6 Wadsworth sculptures in the exhibition. This is Flight of Night from 1916. And we have this elegant depiction of the goddess Diana, goddess of night and the hunt. Here, her body arches gracefully as she's poised above a celestial orb, her attribute, the moon. What Manship's done so beautifully is he's infused a sense of movement into this sculpture. That is exactly what set his work apart from earlier precedents. Living in New York City, he was keenly aware of this demand and availability of entertainment in motion, film, live performances, dance halls. The liberated female body was increasingly abundant, and he pays a nod to this reality, this contemporary sensibility, by modernizing his depiction of Diana. Another section of the exhibition is called Art for the Public, where Manship's popularity and demand increased, resulting in large-scale works, major public commissions. I'm standing in front of Diana and Actaeon, which was completed as a heroic 7-foot version for Brook Green Gardens in South Carolina. This pairing is a slightly reduced version, and you see Manship revisiting the subject of Diana, the goddess of night, and the hunt from an earlier diminutive version, now turned into a powerful woman on the move. She's released her arrow into Actaeon, who accidentally discovered her bathing nude in the woods. Her punishment goes beyond piercing him with the arrow, and she turns him into a stag. Notice the horns coming out of his head, and ultimately turns his own hounds against him. What makes Manship's work so incredible is this sense of visual suspense and intrigue. While Manship is revisiting a subject that he's completed and sculpted before, he's also exploring new ways to add visual intrigue, such as this separation between the two, this intentional space that adds this moment and holds our attention. And to me, it seems like he has motion picture film on the brain, and he's trying to do in sculpture what others are doing in film. Thinking of art for the public, what could be more public than Rockefeller Center in the heart of New York City, where Manship's gilded Prometheus, seen here in progress in the studio, looks over this urban oasis where people enjoy coming together, ice skating, having a picnic, and just enjoying a moment within the density of New York City. When J.D. Rockefeller found himself as the sole investor of this property in the center of New York City after the crash of 1929, he turned his idea into something that would be a cross-section for humanity. And he invited leading artists of the day to create sculptures and architectural ornamentation for the surrounding buildings. Manship's Prometheus is at the heart of this urban oasis. And what does he do? He taps Greek mythology for his inspiration. The story of Prometheus is that he stole fire from the gods and brought it to humankind. And this gilded hero overlooks this plaza to this day, forming a backdrop to so many people's family photos, engagement photos, or tourist snapshots. I felt it was important that some representation of Prometheus at Rockefeller Center made its way into the installation. And no surprise, they wouldn't let us borrow the actual Prometheus. But we have here a very small maquette, which shows Manship's early working process. Here in this small-scale work, we see Manship working through the basic elements of the composition, which are retained in the finished version. Even at this early stage, you can see him experimenting with the gilded surface, which of course we know to be in the final work. In the final section of the exhibition, we bring you to the larger context of Manship's era and urban life in the 1920s and 30s. This section enabled us to tap the treasures of Art Deco objects in our textile collection, our costume collection, collections of American decorative arts, and works on paper. Each of these works still has a connection to the past. That allure of antiquity is evidenced in women's fashion, music, modern dance, and even in textile production. This Cheney textile, made here in Manchester, Connecticut, represents the hallmarks of the Art Deco era. We have this juxtaposition of ancient ideas with a modern geometric pattern. In the center of the diamond is none other than Diana, who we've seen previously, and her faithful hound. The Cheney brothers worked with French ironworker Edgar Brandt to make a series of patterns that combined Art Deco elements coming out of France with the aesthetic here in the United States. This textile is one of several in the collection that belong to this Art Deco era, marked by juxtapositions of past and present, but also feeling of the moment.